families and with patients that getting a diagnosis is often so difficult. So understanding the genetic causes of a disease can really help shorten that odyssey. And also understanding the genetic cause of a rare disease is the first step towards finding a treatment. So that's what kind of linked neurology and genetics for me.
Originally going into research, what drew you into research?
Well, I went to medical school to take care of patients, and that's a real privilege. However, if you don't have much to offer in terms of effective treatment, then you end up sharing your patients' frustration, and you want to do something about it. So helping to do research was the answer, and I believe that participating in research, conducting research is the best way for us to treatments for rare diseases.
We've come such a long way so fast. I think people sometimes forget, but studying molecular genetics in the mid-1990s, this was before mapping of the human genome. How different an environment was it, and how far have we come from that point?
Right, Danny, it was very different. So I'm spending my days and weeks doing the testing for a mutation or a sequencing would take a very long time because it was all done manually. So now the same work can be in and at a fraction of the cost and very quickly. So this is a great opportunity for rare diseases, I think, because it has made it possible for us to get to a diagnosis much faster and just typically find out without doing a lot of other tests. So we can help with the diagnosis, and it has also really opened up so many new opportunities to us to get better treatments to patients.
Change the way you think of rare diseases?
It does. First of all, many rare diseases are actually more common than we originally thought, so that we can make a diagnosis genetically. And now that that is more accessible, we realize that there's maybe a lot more people out there. So it has clearly changed the way we think about it. We've also recognized that in the past, doctors have relied on their clinical exam and sort of their knowledge, and now with the genetics supporting that kind of diagnosis, we recognize that there is many more different variations of a disease than we originally thought.
Focus on neuromuscular disease. You've worked a lot with patients who have muscular dystrophy. We're on the cusp of what appears to be meaningful therapeutic advances. What is that like for you as a clinician?
On one hand, it's really exciting. I feel that finally, treatments are in the clinical phase, and these treatments are really based on a solid understanding of the underlying disease biology. So they're very promising. On the other hand, I am frustrated because when I went into this field, I was like so many, perhaps naively thinking that now that we know the gene, in a few years there'll be gene therapy and it'll be all curable. And now it's sort of 20 years later, and it hasn't quite happened. So when I see patients, prescription pad is in the case of dystrophies is for steroids, and they work, but they have a lot of side effects. So I'm sharing my patients' frustration that this has taken so long. I'm optimistic that we can change that, and part of the work that we're doing at NCATS right now, our work, which is the National Center for Advancing Translational Sciences, is about getting process to move more quickly. We work on developing and demonstrating ways to improve the research process. So I'm quite optimistic, but I wish we could have gotten there faster.
So how did you go from Columbia and what you were doing there to make it to the National Institutes of Health?
I was working as a doctor and a researcher at Columbia University for many years. And I was struck how long the process took. So, for example, I was seeing patients with Lou Gehrig's disease and I wanted them to have access to a clinical trial. And by the time sometimes we went through all the bureaucracy of opening up the trial, the paper sometimes to participate, and it was just heartbreaking. So when I had the opportunity to go to the NIH, I thought maybe I could do something about it. And the problem is, with rare diseases that because they're rare, researchers and doctors from many different universities have to work together to test treatments and to figure out how we could best help. But in order for researchers to work together from many different places, we need some, contracts between the universities. You need IRB approval, IRB meaning the Institutional Review Board approval for the ethical approval of the studies. And this was done, I thought, very inefficiently. It took often almost a year to get a project started because this protocol would be reviewed at many, many different universities and hospitals' ethics boards, and the same contract would be renegotiated one-off at each place. So I was really excited when I came to the NIH because I had a chance to do something about it. We now have some great successful pilot projects that have demonstrated that we can do better and we can really cut down these timelines. And that's so important, especially for rare diseases, because we can get more research done faster.
There's some examples of that. Is there, any increase of efficiency you can point to in that regard?
Oh, yeah, very much so. So when I first came to the NIH, the National Institutes of Health, I was working for the institute that focuses on neurological disorders, and I had the chance to launch something called NeuroNext, which is a network for early phase trials in neurological disorders, most of them rare. And we were able in that network to show that we can actually have all the 25 different universities and hospitals rely on one single IRB and use pre-negotiated contracts. And that helped us shave down that startup time to less than 3 months from often a year. So that's really, I think, exciting in a way because we can just move things through this testing phase faster.
Our audience that they can instant message questions that they may have for our Petra as we go, and we'll try to work them into the conversation as best we can or save them up at the end. You joined NIH's National Institute of Neurological Disorders and Stroke. You oversaw the extramural clinical research program there. What were your responsibilities in that role?
Well, it's overseeing clinical trials in terms of their safety, in terms of planning for the portfolio and what we should support. I mentioned already one of the initiatives was a trial network because I felt that if we start for each clinical trial, and as you know, clinical trials are in the end needed to ensure that we can bring new treatments to patients and make sure that they're safe and that they're effective. But we're oftentimes, for each trial, building infrastructure, building a network. And then when the trial was over, all that experience and that infrastructure would be lost. So I mentioned this network, NeuroNext, that I helped launch. And not only did they show that they could do things more efficiently, but another thing that I think was important there was that we made sure that there's active patient participation all through the life cycle of a project. We required that the academic investigators would already come in, partnering with the patient group, that the patients would be asked if the question actually mattered to them. They would have input on the protocol. It would also be partners all along in terms of communicating the trial to patients, even on the safety oversight, just to increase that trust and to have a two-way street and make sure that the kinds of trials we do really matter to patients and help them.
You spoke a little about this a moment ago, but as someone who ran clinical trials prior to coming to NIH, did you come with frustrations over the way things were done, the long time and slow pace of progressing an experimental therapy to the market?
Oh, very much so. I think that I mentioned already to you sort of some of the mundane things that I think can make a big difference in terms of just making all the bureaucracy more efficient. But there's something else that I find sometimes frustrating and that I saw when I was in academia. It's that there's many different stakeholders involved. So no academic researcher can bring a treatment all the way to patients, all the way to the pharmacy shelf, in a way, which is what we all want to do, right? We want to make sure that they're better treatments. But rather than to do that, it takes not only one researcher, it takes a team. It also requires handoff, and it requires coordination patient groups, among investigators. So I think that that's one of the frustrations, and I hope that at the NIH and in my new role in the Office of Rare Diseases Research, that's the chance to help a and a neutral kind of party that can make sure that the efforts are coordinated. So if we have one, little registry or study here, another one there, and they're not really working together and have the best possible synergy, then it will take us longer to get to our goal. And I think we all have the same goal. So I'm hoping that at the NIH we can help make that process more coordinated.
About a year and a half ago, you joined NCATS, the National Center for Advancing Translational Sciences, the vision of the innovation. To take a step back, what is meant by translational science or translational research?
Yeah, so this are all like long names, but essentially it's exactly what the word says. Translational science means we want to translate, meaning something from the discovery all the way to health benefit. The last 20 years have seen unprecedented advances in biomedical research, but not quite as many things have made it across the finish line and are actually now benefiting patients, benefiting people. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that the process from a discovery, that be in the laboratory or in the clinic or in the community, patients could discover something, right? Families could discover something, but how do you get from that to actually having the evidence and the information you need to have it benefit everybody affected by that problem? So that's what NCATS is about. We're trying to accelerate the process. So we're not focused on one particular disease, but we're focused on making the process better for everybody. So we think that there are system-wide bottlenecks, and I had mentioned some of them in this translational research process. And this is particularly critical for rare diseases because, most of them don't have an effective treatment right now, so we depend on this process to work. So that's how we hope to tackle it. We're not focused on just one set of diseases. It's all rare diseases, and we just try to help make process faster and better.
Join the Division of Clinical Innovation. What were your responsibilities?
Dan, I'm afraid I have to give some more acronyms here. So my main responsibility was in the beginning to look after the Clinical and Translational Science Award Program, or CTSA program as it is known. So this program includes over 50 of the major academic medical research centers that work together to accelerate the path from discovery to health benefit. And so I'm working with the investigators, and these are the very places, the universities, the hospitals, the researchers and doctors that many patients with rare diseases and their families end up turning to, because these are often the specialists and the experts that people want to get to. My main work in the beginning was to collaboratively with the investigators help this network of over 50 academic medical research centers to be as effective as possible in advancing translation from discovery to health benefit.
What is NCATS' role? What's the opportunity it has for making an impact?
NCATS, I think, can be a catalyst. A catalyst meaning something that accelerates, that speeds up, that helps a process. So we don't focus on one specific disease, but try to improve the process as such. And the opportunity is that there have been these tremendous advances really in our understanding in many rare diseases, in common diseases, and we can't really apparently seem to get fast enough in terms of making sure that all these discoveries actually lead to helping patients as soon as possible. So we want to improve the process, and the opportunities, there are many opportunities, but the key opportunities I see are to use informatics in a better way. So in most areas of our life, the use of data and informatics has really transformed how we live. It's how we find places, how we, it's all on our phones, and how we bank and everything. But that is, there is, I think, still opportunities. So we need to help work with patient groups, with investigators, and with partners in the government to try to help use cutting-edge informatics and use data better and smarter so we can get, I think that's one of the transformative opportunities. The other opportunity seems so obvious, but it is something that I think also in the last few years has really received much needed attention that it should have had all along among, for example, researchers often, and that is the very active engagement of patients and patient groups and families. So they're the most important stakeholders, certainly, and so to ask them from the beginning, what question is really important to you, what really matters to you in terms of, outcome measures. So for clinical trial, we need to have something to make sure that we can measure if the treatment works. So make sure that whatever we measure is meaningful to patients and families. It's not what the doctors think is meaningful. We sometimes think we know this from treating, but it's much better to ask them directly. So I think informatics and active patient engagement are among the key opportunities we have.
So we're going to go back to both of those topics as we talk, but there's a question from a participant, a mother of a child with spinal muscular atrophy. Mm-hmm. She's asking what she do to help the ISIS SMNRX. I assume this is an experimental therapy.
This is a trial, right?
How to help get it approved quickly. She's expressing frustration that people are dragging their feet and could at least try to get it approved for fast track approval. This might be more an FDA than an NIH question.
Right.
I'm curious, are there things you would tell a patient, and are there ways, I'm sure you hear a lot of frustration from patients over the slow pace of their perspective, the slow pace of moving things from the clinic to the point where patients can actually benefit from these therapies. What do you tell patients?
Right, it's hard. I have 4 children myself, and I can understand where the viewer comes from, and I think there's a attention, because on the one hand you want the treat for your children as quickly as possible. On the other hand, we need to make sure that the treatments are actually safe and effective, and that's what the FDA's role is. And I can fully understand where that comes from, but I think the best thing you can do is, or everybody can do with the rare disease, is to participate in research, to actively engage in research. A lot of clinical trials take too long to get the participants enrolled. I know in this one that wasn't the case, but oftentimes that is the case because somehow people are not maybe as knowledgeable about research, or maybe their doctors don't tell them. So the best thing you can do is join a patient group, patient advocacy group, and try to learn about research and try to really engage as much as possible. That will speed things up, and I'm hoping with the caller or the person who emailed that this particular treatment will get to patients soon. But really, active engagement is the most important thing.
Discovery and translation are different processes, and NIH was built more for discovery than translation. I'm wondering how it changes the approach NCATS takes from the traditional role of NIH, and does force it to be more interactive with folks? And is there a cultural difference with NCATS versus the more traditional parts of NIH?
Right. So we clearly, partner with the other institutes and centers at the NIH who are focused more on a particular disease or a set of diseases And there is a difference between, as you said, between discovery research and translational research. One of the big differences is that translational research requires teamwork. It typically requires people from different disciplines to work together because there's different skills needed. So if a scientist is in the laboratory, they could be brilliant and have all the skills they need, but then they discover something that they then want to translate and take to ultimately be available to patients. It's a whole set of different skills. There has to be an understanding of how drugs are developed, and there has to be an understanding of how to successfully partner. So the handoff is so important. So we can have, we can move really fast in one phase of the research, but then if we don't plan for the next 5 steps, and if there's no partner ready to take, so it's like a ball game, somebody has to catch the ball from you, and that has to happen quickly, and that's where you can really, save time and move faster. And there has to also be an understanding on how medical products are commercialized, and how they're reviewed by the FDA. So all of these things, regulatory, commercial, partnership, team science, are things that we are interested in at NCATS and that we are promoting. And we do this for all diseases, especially I think for rare diseases, that it's key to really foster these kinds of skills and this kind of culture in the workforce.
Well, one issue that has emerged in recent years as far as the problems with translation has been the irreproducibility of results. How this fits into the challenges of translation today as you see it?
Well, so that's, of course, a potential problem because if there is an irreproducible result that can lead a field astray, it can lead you kind of walking down the wrong path and then wasting time, precious time for people with rare diseases by pursuing an avenue of research that turns out didn't have as strong of a basis. So that's why it is now, as you may know, at the NIH, a priority to help, making sure that research findings are rigorous before they are translated. And many times in the private sector, in companies, people will make sure and reproduce results first before they act on them for translation. And that's good for everybody because then we kind of focus on a more likely path to success.
A bit about bottlenecks in the system, but where do you see the places where we can make improvements in translation? Are there ways to streamline the process and make it more efficient?
I sure believe so. So I think that effective partnerships are key to this. So, there's many stakeholders in this enterprise, and there is the patient families most importantly. They are doctors, researchers, the NIH, the FDA, and many partners in this. It can coordinate between the different partners. I think we can avoid the bottlenecks that come from not planning ahead and not having handoffs and from maybe having different efforts that are not entirely kind of working towards the same intermediate goal. So what I mean by that is that if, for example, there is naturally, sometimes there's some competition between researchers or even among patient groups that happens sometimes, right? And so if we can try to recognize that there's so much work to be done, there's such a great need, and there's enough for everybody to do in almost, in all rare diseases that I know of, so that if we can hopefully at the NIH be someone who can help facilitate and help coordinate this and make sure that, for example, when people collect data, that the data will become available to the research community. That could be a big step forward, because in rare diseases, these data are very, very rare also, and very sort of precious and important. So if we can make sure they're collected in a way that different groups don't collect like all different data, that could be one way to overcome the bottleneck. I mentioned earlier, it sometimes takes too long to get patients connected or families connected with research opportunities. So I think there's another bottleneck. So there has already been great success, and there's wonderful stories where patient groups have developed contact registries, so that when a trial opportunity came up, they could let everybody know very quickly, and the trial could fill up very quickly, shaving off essentially months sometimes of a project. So those are great ways to overcome bottlenecks, I think.
The things you talked about earlier was data, but I'm wondering what role you think technology can play in this, particularly with regards to new digital health technologies for monitoring and data gathering, improving the clinical trial process. I know FDA has started to allow the use of some of this in clinical trials.
Yeah, I think that is really huge, and that can really play an transformative role. So, for example, gathering data from patients using technology. We all have our phones, and the phones can figure out how active we are. There are apps there now, research apps where people could put in, answer a few questions once in a while on their phone, how they feel or what kind of symptoms they have. And that kind of technology, I think, could really transform the whole enterprise, because instead of having to come to hospital, every X months to get out, some of this could maybe be done through remote data collection. So I think this can, using the technology, using the internet more, can democratize research and can give patients more of an active role. It can also make research less research, so that we can do more research as a society, because we just do it in a smart way. So I'm very excited about the use of technology. There's, of course, concerns with it, but we will work with everything, and we have to weigh the risks and the benefits, and we have to make sure that we protect privacy and so on to the extent possible. But at the same time, we should strive as a community for people with rare diseases to not leave that kind of opportunity underused because of the potential risks.
I want to remind our audience that they can instant message questions they may have for Petra as we go, and we'll try to work them into our conversation as best we can, or save them up for the end. Please use the Q&A box at the lower corner of your screen. In September, you were appointed to head the Office of Rare Diseases Research. For participants who may not be familiar with the office, what does it do?
Well, the office was established in 1993 at the NIH. Before, there was a smaller office after the Orphan Drug Act had passed in 1983. And the Office of Rare Diseases Research stimulates and promotes research to the benefit of the many people living with rare diseases and their families. And we have a number of programs. You mentioned some of them in the beginning. So one of the programs is the Rare Diseases Clinical Research Network, or because government we call it RDCRN. That is a 22 consortia, meaning sort of groups of investigators, and 250 places worldwide. So in this case, usually NIH funding is used mostly in the United States, but in the case of rare diseases, we recognize that it's global, and so there's also international partners in this. These investigators sort of as together study over 280 rare diseases, 90 active protocols. And one of the principles in this network is that we aware that there's shared tools, shared resources, so that we can see more rare diseases. So instead of just having a network for one disease, typically these consortia focus on a group of rare diseases that have something in common. And that's also an important message to keep in mind. So diseases are rare, meaning that, as you know, by definition, each of them affects fewer than 200,000 Americans. However, these illnesses affect an estimated 25 million Americans. So you look at each of these rare diseases as a sort of very small kind of slice, then it is a challenge because there's thousands of them. So what we try to do in the Rare Disease Research Consortia is to have them focus on a group of diseases that have something in common, either the underlying mechanism or a particular set of symptoms in common. And one other important feature of these rare disease clinical research network groups is that you have to have a patient advocacy group participate from the beginning. I think that is really key. So as a result, there's 130 patient advocacy groups participating in this. Another program, Danny, that you mentioned is called GARD. That's the Genetic and Rare Diseases Information Center program. And this is really an information hub or a tool for people to learn about rare and genetic diseases. It's meant for patients, for families, but also researchers and just the public. And the information is provided by specialists, genetics counselors. We have a physician, and so we try to provide high quality information. This can be accessed through our website. That is rarediseases.info.nih.gov, and I'm sure we can send out links as a follow-up to this webinar. And we also have options for people to email questions or to speak to a person to call us, and so we can answer questions. A program we have focuses on scientific conferences. So at times the first step in actually making some headway in a rare disease is to bring people together, to convene patients and researchers. So we have in the Office of Rare Diseases Research at NCATS a committee that manages scientific opportunities for conferences. And then another program that is called the Global Rare Diseases Patient Registry Data Repository. So this is essentially about providing a one-stop shop for people who are looking for information and resources on how to registries, what to look out for when they do registries. And the thing that I would like to mention is also that we work with many others at the NIH and patient groups and outside stakeholders on the Rare Disease Day, which, as you know, is coming up on February 29th. So we're working on an event on the NIH campus that can also be accessed via webinar by those who cannot come to Bethesda.
The area of neurology, and because of that, you've had a fair bit of exposure naturally to rare diseases. You said to me that rare diseases have the greatest need for innovation in clinical research methodology. I'm wondering why that is. What did you mean by that?
The traditional methods have brought reasonable results in some of the common diseases. In rare diseases, we haven't quite enough progress in terms of actually having effective treatments. So the World Health Organization estimates that we have over 5,000 rare diseases, but we have treatments for probably only a couple of hundred. So that's not acceptable. So that's why I'm thinking that these innovations that we are implementing, such as streamlining the research process, using informatics smarter, actively engaging patients, are particularly important for rare diseases because of the magnitude and the great need. So we need, in order to respond properly, we need true innovation. Just tweaking things will not be enough. So I'm really thinking that many of the innovations we are trying to make to the clinical research enterprise are most important for rare diseases. And also keep in mind that many common diseases now, what so-called common diseases are, our increased understanding, more understood as a function of rare diseases. So, for example, if somebody has Parkinson's, so there's a subset of patients with a particular mutation, and so even a disease that doesn't to start with necessarily qualify as a rare disease ends up being split up into smaller subsets, so that many common diseases become rare diseases in a way.
Well, you suggested that rare diseases can provide important insight into diseases. How do you see rare disease insight advancing understanding more common diseases?
When you have a disease which we call monogenic disease, so when you know exactly what gene is affected and what pathway then downstream it comes from that mutation in that gene, then that's sort of a very clear model that you can work with. And a lot of times we know that then such pathways are also involved in more common diseases. So, for example, mitochondrial diseases, which are rare in themselves, can teach us something about energy metabolism. And that kind of a pathway could be affected in a more common disease. And that's a good thing for the rare disease community because it gets more interest and more research resources into the area.
Well, precision medicine, and this is being advanced in part by a greater understanding of genomics, but things we continue to do is slice and dice patient populations to understand the molecular underpinnings of diseases. I mentioned this is changing our perspective of diseases where they're becoming more like rare diseases. Are we getting to a point where you think going to slice and dice common diseases that distinction between rare diseases and common diseases is going to melt away?
Yeah, Annie, I think that is a possibility because there's really new opportunities. So now when we see patients, we have our, the symptoms and then the signs when we examine the patient. But this, this advance in genomics, now oftentimes patients come to the clinic and they bring their sequence. So there's a whole new large amount of data and information on, other genes that could modify the disease-causing gene or different types of mutations. And that really can help us within a given, clinically defined disease to understand that there are subsets, and maybe these subsets have different kinds of progression and respond to different kinds of treatments better, or maybe even in terms of safety, some treatments are safer in patients with a particular profile. So I think that this opens up a whole new opportunity for patients find the right treatment and find it faster, and also for patients to better understand their condition. So I do think that'll happen, that we see rare diseases and common diseases to come closer, and that's why I'm really excited to have the privilege of seeing the rare diseases research office at NCATS as the program that deals with translation of any disease, common or rare, because I think there's many opportunities for synergy, and we can try to apply the same innovations to rare and common diseases, and we can all win if we do that and get things done faster.
I've had a growing number of questions from people in the audience.
Mm-hmm.
And, let me just throw one out to you right now. When it comes to clinical trial and trial design, a participant asked if you think that NIH and FDA could be more collaborative to get on translation and getting patients into trials.
That is a very good point, and that is something that we are working on at the NIH. We have of initiatives now with the FDA to do just that, to try to see how we can improve trials and make sure that the research done at the NIH or with NIH funding optimally prepares for the next step, which hopefully is then a regulatory evaluation, so that we can provide the data that the FDA needs and that we can have natural history studies or clinical trials with designs and data quality standards that are useful to the FDA in their regulatory decision making.
So you mentioned some ways that patient advocacy groups are helping with clinical trial enrollment. I'm wondering, one of the challenges of rare disease clinical trials is that patient populations are so small and that it's often difficult to get to the size you need to do a meaningful study. How much of a barrier does that represent, and what is NIH doing to kind of address that?
Right. I think that's a barrier. I know that for many families, it's a hardship to get to these few places that often participate in a clinical trial as a participating site, hospital, or university. People with disabilities, with small children, they have obviously often difficulty participating for that reason. There are a number of things that they're doing and that I think can make a difference. One that perhaps we need for come to the hospital or the university that often to participate in the clinical trials. So we talked earlier about having families, patients contribute data via the internet or via mobile devices. That could make a difference, because if you have to go to that hospital only once or a few times, and in between you could work with your local clinicians and enter data yourself, that could be an advantage, right? The other, I think, important opportunity is that, I mentioned to you, Danny, that we have this network that is called the CTSA network, the Clinical and Translational Science Support Network, that consists of over 60 of the academic medical research centers. So we are now connecting these different places under Institutional Review Board for Ethics Review, so IRB, one set of contracts. That means that we can very easily in the future open up a new research place. So we can then look where the patients and families are and try to open up research places that are more conveniently located for patients and families. So I think that's kind of one thing, is taking it out of the walls into a mobile and internet space, and the other one is just providing more access sites to the rare disease trials. It's an opportunity to make that easier.
Remind our audience that they can instant message questions they have for Petra as we go, and we'll do our best to get to as many of them as possible. Petra, we've seen the FDA take steps to bring patients more into the process, engage patients more directly, provide channels for their feedback to figure into decision making. Where does the patient fit in at NIH, and has there been an effort to make it more patient-centric or incorporate patients more directly into research?
I think this is a very, very positive and long overdue development. The patients have played a key role on FDA groups, and some of them have, some patient groups have participated in drafting guidance. So that's a great positive step in the right direction. And now many NIH projects require very active patient engagement from the beginning, from the concept of the whole research to the protocol development to safety oversight. And at NCATS, the Rare Diseases Clinical Research Networks, for example, have a patient advocacy group as part of every consortium. So every application has to come with at least one, often several patient advocacy groups. They're actively engaged throughout the cycle of a project. So I think that's a very positive and very important development.
Well, is to improve the clinical trial process. What do you think you learn from patients?
Yes, absolutely. You think there's a lot you can learn. So what outcome measures are meaningful? So you as a clinician or as a researcher, you might think that a certain measure is really is important enough to patients that if you can influence it with your treatment, that's a good enough reason to take the treatment. Well, it turns out that's not always the same as asking the patients themselves. So meaningful outcome measures, then what kinds of protocols are adequate in terms of burden? So we talked earlier about how it's difficult for families to participate in certain protocols because they require maybe frequent visits to a particular place or long visits. So if we engage patients more actively in planning, then we could figure out these issues before and not just figure them out as we're trying to enroll patients and people really just can't participate because it's too burdensome. And then also, how to reach out to patient communities. So who to partners and then the patient advocacy groups themselves to help us understand how we can communicate the need for research and how we can best make people aware of the research opportunities. And it's a bit different for different disease communities depending on the nature of the disease and the severity of the disease. So that's really important areas where I think the active engagement of patients is critical and can make a big difference.
You've talked about some initiatives that are underway. I'm wondering if you could talk about revitalizing the coalition of patient advocacy groups in an NCATS network. Can you explain that?
So, in the Rare Diseases Clinical Research Network, we have patient advocacy groups engaged, throughout in each of the consortia. And that gives us one really exciting opportunity, which is to have all of these patient groups also exchange, lessons learned, best practices, information, and they form what we call the CPAC, the Coalition of Patient Advocacy Groups, and quarterly calls. And what we're doing now is making these calls into webinars, because as we can see today, that's better than just a call. And also, we try to work with the co-chairs of the CPAC, of this Coalition of Patient Advocacy Groups, figure out what topics people are interested in. So we solicit agenda items, and we'll try to provide some information, maybe some presentations, and just make it more interactive and just a topic of interest so that we can meet the needs of our communities.
Our participants did send in a question about they could become one of the patient organization groups that work with ORDR.
Invite them that they send an email, and we can talk. And also, because this, since I have, to take on this new position in the Office of Rare Diseases Research, I had so many people reach out to me, and it's been really wonderful talking to people on the phone, meeting with people, mostly from patient groups, and listening to their needs. And what has struck me is that many groups have some needs. There's, of course, smaller groups and larger groups, and there's people who are very early on in terms of getting researchers and gathering other patients and families, and there's people who are more advanced. But the patients are often the same. So one of the things that we are hoping to do is to maybe get groups together and see what was particularly successful, and then come up with a toolkit, if you wish, of links and resources at these different stages of where a patient group might be, so that it doesn't all depend on myself or somebody on our team sharing their understanding of what works best, but we can connect people more directly with tools and resources. So that I think would be a good thing for the Office of Rare Diseases Research to do.
So looking at training opportunities to help the community members understand drug development and clinical research, what kind of things are you thinking about in this regard?
We want to really engage patients as active partners, but we have to kind of think about what do we need to provide them with to be able to do that, and how can we support them in the role. Because I work for the so I have like an official support to do so, but people in the community may also want more support. So some groups have created really good training opportunities, if you wish, for community and patients and family members who want to engage in research. Sometimes they just want to have some information on how does drug development actually work, or how does one actually engage with an academic research or with industry, and so I think that's a really great contribution that some groups have created, these tailored training opportunities for patients, and we will think about how we can disseminate such programs or provide information that people want in order to feel more empowered as active research partners.
So think about your new role. What are you most excited about?
I'm most excited about the different stakeholders in this enterprise to come together, to coordinate, to be a facilitator. I mentioned to you that it would be great to kind of put together a toolkit, and not only would that provide us with a way of getting people access to the information and resources they need, but it could also help us identify gaps. So I'm excited about sort of listening and figuring out where the gaps are and how we can best support people living with rare diseases. I think, to come back to some of the things we discussed earlier, Danny, that information and data is a great opportunity that I'm excited about, and we want to look into how we can best help communities do that. There's such great advance in technology, so how can we harness that for rare diseases? How can we make sure that then somebody in a registry that the group doesn't have to reinvent the wheel and can kind of connect to them and use similar tools so that these data sets can talk to each other? that we can connect, let's say, electronic health records, data from mobile devices, and from registries effectively. And another opportunity is really the partnering, making sure that we leverage each other's work and that we have good handoff. So that's kind of what I'm excited about, and I'm looking forward to working with the community to make this happen.
As you settle into this new role, are there changes you expect to make, and what do you hope your ultimate impact on this office will be?
The ultimate impact will be to bring back treatments to the people living with rare diseases and their families. And what gets us there, and I think there will be changes as opportunities evolve, as there's new technologies and new research findings. That's our ultimate goal. So we want to do what gets us there and not do what doesn't get us there.
We have a few minutes left. I'm going to turn to questions from our audience here. If you have questions, you can still try to send them in, and I will do my best to get to them. I want to ask about opportunities, what opportunities you see for repurposing and research at NCATS and ORDR. Are there differences for on-patent versus patent repurposing studies?
Yeah, so that's, of course, an important area, because with drug repurposing, can shave off years of the development process. So if a drug already has, safety data or has been in the clinic, that can really be very helpful. And NCATS has a number of programs that can maybe of interest there. There is the TREND program, so the treatments in rare and neglected diseases, and the BRIDGES program, bridging innovative development gaps. Both programs are at NCATS, and they help provide access to resources, know-how, and research groups that are interested in a particular, treatment or target for a rare disease. We also have a program called New Therapeutic Uses, where we specifically focus on repurposing. And of course, when the repurposed therapeutic is sort of on the shelf, so to speak, in still on patent, then there is more of a natural incentive for development. When it's not, then that's maybe more a role for public funding to try to evaluate if it's actually effective. But it's very important that I think these kinds of repurposed drugs are actually, holy. So an example, when I was seeing patients with Lou Gehrig's disease, there was a paper sitting that lithium may be effective. And lithium is a drug that's used for bipolar disorder, so for a mental illness. And of course, it's available in the United States just for a different indication. So there was a great, and understandably, I get that, there was a great run, and people were trying to get their doctors to prescribe lithium, and many people did take it. But it turns out, it has a lot of side effects. And when the trial was done, it wasn't actually effective. So the initial results were kind of not reproduced, if you wish. So the lesson from that is that rather than everybody just kind of taking it, without any data being gathered from that about the safety or the effectiveness, the best that a patient community can do when they're interested in figuring out if a drug will be repurposed is to plan on collecting some data and making sure that collection is good enough to actually answer the question that everybody wants to know: is this actually worth a child, or is this worth taking? Because you want to make sure you only give something, if it's actually helping.
Okay. Try to go rapid fire here because I have more questions than time right now.
Okay.
But one participant asked, I feel about removing placebos in some trials. They see this as a barrier in their particular disease to getting people to participate in,
yes.
in trials.
So sometimes that's a challenge, of course, to accept a placebo. But there is ways of working through that. There could be maybe, different dose ranges, or there could be a brief placebo period followed by an open label period where if the intervention is safe, everybody enrolled can get it. So there's ways how patients and researchers can work together, and that's a case for active patient engagement, where these kinds of things have to be discussed with the patient community, the regulators, and the researchers, so that there can be a compromise that's acceptable to all.
Another participant asked about your thoughts on developing global registries and biorepositories. They're coming from Europe, where a lot of countries maintain their own biorepositories and registries.
It can be, that can be an important platform, and can really accelerate the understanding of disease, can accelerate research, and can help with trial planning and trial implementation. Certainly an important step that I think patient organizations can look into and patients to contribute to registries or to maintain them.
About your opinion on the most important data a patient advocacy group should collect for their rare disease patient registry.
Something that, yes, this is something that we're hoping to work with the communities and provide information on. And if you go to the GRDR website, there is some information already there. For example, some suggested data that should be collected on our website, and we can send that around as among some of the follow-up emails, the link to that website that suggests some things that should be collected. Of course, registries have different purposes. So it could be a registry to get people trial access, in which case you want to collect contact information so you can actually email people when there is a trial. And then other people call a registry something that actually collects data on the disease progression, in which case the data have to be a little different and higher quality and so on. But that's something that you could check out our website, and we hope to over time make that even better so that you can find the information you're looking for.
And this will be our last question, but a participant asked, would it be helpful to you and NCATS if some of the larger umbrella rare disease organizations came together to pool their resources and communications capabilities in advancing the common cause of rare disease patients?
Collaboration is always important, but there's so much work to do, and I think that the different organizations can coordinate and collaborate to advance research for better treatments for people with rare diseases. So sometimes, it's not so easy to actually combine and pool resources, but what we hope in the Office of Rare Diseases Research to offer is to be a convener and a neutral facilitator and bring together groups so that they can share information, share resources, and identify where the gaps are and what part of that work each of the partners could take over without duplicating efforts.
Well, I thank Petra Kaufmann, Director of the Office of Rare Diseases Research at the National Institutes of Health National Center for Advancing Translational Science, for taking the time to speak with us today. Wish you all the best in your new role and look forward to working with you.
Danny, for the opportunity. My pleasure.
And be sure to join us tomorrow for our next webinar, which will focus on issues surrounding informed consent. Got a terrific panel lined up, and I'll be moderating. I hope all of you tune in for that. And me every week for our RareCast podcast, which you can find on Global Genes Rare Daily or on SoundCloud, iTunes, or Stitcher. You can continue the conversation with us by following us on Twitter at DS Levine, and Global Genes is at Global Genes. As you seek to learn more about rare diseases and connect with others, I encourage you to explore the many resources available on the Global Genes website. On behalf of Global Genes, I'm Daniel Levine. Thank you all for joining us for today's webinar.
We connected. Well done. Thank you. Excel, maybe.